Good evening. It is February 21st. It is 7 p.m. and we're here from our scheduled nightly meeting. We have a full slate of commissioners, our administrator, and the clerk of the board. At this time, I'll call the meeting to order and ask everyone to please rise and join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, the first item on the agenda is the approval of meeting minutes of December 20th and January 3rd. Is there any corrections, additions, or revisions?
No.
Okay. With that, we'll move right down to vouchers. I believe there's two.
We have two vouchers. Move for approval of fund expenditures in the total amount of $1,133,494.22. All right, you're correct. I'm sorry. Move for the approval of fund expenditures in a total amount of $361,144.37 as presented, and note that it has been reviewed and signed by two representatives of the auditor's office and the county administrator.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Move for approval of salary clearing payroll and emergency management payroll in the amount of $1,133,494.22 as presented, and note that it has been reviewed and signed by two representatives of the auditor's office.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. With that, we'll move down to the approval of the consent agenda. We have two items on the consent agenda tonight.
Move for approval of consent agenda items 1 and 2 as presented.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second for the items on the consent agenda 1 and 2. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Moves us down to public comment. Is there anybody for public comment?
I just have a quick public comment. Mr. John Rose asked me, he has another meeting, and he asked me to bring these charts to you on the mortality rate and the Florida VARs, and to get together with him if you want any more information on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, LaWanda Hatch, Precinct 100. I am here because at the last week's meeting, I was told by the prosecuting attorney's wife, actually in the meeting, that she felt that she was that there was some sexist remarks made to her. So I went and listened to the meeting before. I wasn't able to make the 7th meeting. I had a prior meeting engagement that I needed to attend that day. So I went back, and it was actually had to do with the Public Works Director. So I went and listened to the Public Works Director to find out what was being said and what prompted her comments. So I was shocked. My husband's family has been farming for 58 years. And the Public Works Director falsely claimed that farmers are getting permits to actually enter from the county road to their farm. That is an absolute falsehood. There are no permits. I would like to see the county code for that. I would like to know what farmers, because he claims some are getting it and some aren't, and now they want to start charging for those permits. First of all, farmers pay a horrendous amount of taxes, property taxes that go to this county, not only for their ground, but for their equipment. So farmers can pay $50,000, $60,000 a year in property taxes. Those are what they pay to be able to, and all the agriculture, I mean, out where we live, it's all zoned for agriculture. All of it is. And so you don't need to get special permits to move your equipment from one field to another because it's all zoned for farming. And if you go on those county roads, in fact, where the farmers actually go from the county road to their farm, they build up the ground. It is very sturdy, and actually the road is more stable there. It's where the buildup of the road has a ditch. There's not as much support on the side just going down the road. That's where you get some fracturing. I asked my husband, have you ever heard of anyone? And I won't repeat what he said, but he said it was pretty much, no, nobody ever has paid for or even applied for permits. And I want you to think about this scenario. If you're growing sweet corn, you're going to get a call maybe at 10 o'clock at night that be ready at 5 a.m. We're going to be harvesting your corn to process from the processor. Is the Public Works gentleman going to give us a permit at 4 a.m. to actually enter our own farm? And then you think about the fact that many of those asphalted roads were initially asphalted by the farmer themselves. And the county agrees to upkeep it, but that is because a farmer first has to prove that enough equipment is being driven back and forth on his road that he doesn't have to maintain it. A gravel road is maintained by the farmer, not the county. And so, so he pays to have the road paved, and now he's got to pay to go on and off of it to actually farm. That's crazy. I don't know where these ideas come from. But when I think what happened in that meeting, as I observed it, when Mrs. Sant was speaking, I'll speak to that at the next comment. Sorry. Thank you.
Is there anybody else for public comment?
George Dockstuder, Self Landing Road, Pasco. A couple comments. One, I keep hearing on the radio all the time to get an employment tax refund for business, and I assume since we're running all this money, we're a business, and I'm wondering if the county's applied for it or if they're eligible to apply for it. It's up to $26,000 an employee, and if we could even be eligible for part of that, this is that stupid government giveaway COVID money. We might as well get our damn share of it because we can use the help on the roads and a few other things. And then the other thing, I notice I don't see him, our illustrious assessor is not here, who kept telling us our taxes weren't going to go up because we were going to lower the levy rate. Well, I don't have that big of a fancy house or anything. I'm probably pretty average for the county. And my taxes went up 19% last year. I'd sure as hell like to know where we're going to spend all that extra money. Thank you.
Good evening. Kevin Heinen, Mesa, Washington, Franklin County resident. One question I want answered by the commissioners through our Public Works director is, where is he coming up with these ideas? I mean, they just coming out of the blue. You know, and I looked at these fees that he's trying to implement. You know, $150, are we going to have to hire another person to do all these inspections or what? You know, all these things, they don't make sense. What's wrong with the way things are now, the way they've been for the last 30 years? The county put in public roads, paved roads. We never had any access. Another thing is, I'd like to see the commissioners rescind the requirement for a paved access at every permitted house or whatever. There's no reason there needs to be a house, a normal family, they're going to invest $250,000 to $350,000. That's 2.5% just to do that one thing. There's no reason for it. We have paved roads, guys. We've driven off of our gravel roads. And there's a lot of gravel roads that are approached onto paved roads today, Glade Road, whatever, that don't have paved approaches on them. So I think that's one thing the commissioners need to look at, rescinding that deal. It's just, it's burdensome on the public of Franklin County, another cost. Where's it going to stop? Thank you.
I'm Kurt Didier from Eltopia. I guess one thing, and all you people that work down here at the courthouse, the one thing that you forget when we're talking about these fees on approaches and everything else, the farmer owns to the middle of the road. You don't own it. Not one shape or form. The farmer, you look at the deal, we own right to the middle of the road. You have the ability to operate and maintain it, not impose fees on us on land that we already own. We own it, plain and simple. And out there, I guess, on the road I live on, if I really wanted to get nasty, I could probably apply for you guys just to get the hell off because I own both sides. And just say, you know what, leave me alone, get out of here, don't bother me no more. You know, but I haven't, but I can. I found out from my wife, she works at Stenswood Kennewick, she says you can apply to have you guys negated or completely off the road because I own on both sides of it. And basically I own the road. Now, I don't have a problem with you owning or operating and maintaining it, but when you want to start charging me for everything, I think it's pretty ridiculous. I think what the word I really want to say is just revenue gathering, plain and simple. Because like Kevin Hine or one of George Docksetter's, the taxes, when I got my new assessment, in which with levies and bonds, that assessment don't mean nothing because your levies and bonds, that amount goes down. So all this extra money is coming right here to the county. No place else on those assessments. It's to you. I'd sure like to know where it's all going, to be honest with you, because from 2008 to now, my taxes are almost doubled for, 70–80% now. Getting pretty horrendous, and that's like, okay, I don't see no new paved roads. The only ones I see is for these housing developments, and you guys don't make those realtors or those developers or any of those people pay a premium to have to, like Dent Road had to be widened and a bunch of stuff when they put in that development down there. Did it or did it not? Am I wrong? Who paid for that? Taxpayers. You didn't make them developers do it. You didn't put an impact fee on that deal to do it. That's the same thing as what you're doing to me. So why ain't you making those guys pay for when those roads have to be upgraded and changed? Sorry, George. Thank you.
Kevin Heinen, one more thing I forgot to say is you guys have pulled how much money out of the road department every year? I know it's gotten less. I think it was $350,000 last year, $500 the year before, $700 the previous year, and I'm kind of pulling numbers. But why is he needing more permitting fees and everything if you guys keep taking money out of the road department? It doesn't make sense, guys. Thank you.
Anybody on the phone?
I'm sorry. Mr. Rose came in here and I totally forgot. His main reason was to give you that information. And he knows that you have a bi-county meeting this week. And he wanted to say that he agrees with the sheriff to have have our own mental health situation. And I totally forgot and I needed to state that. Thank you.
Is there anybody else for public comment? Seeing none, we'll move to the Commissioner Administrator updates. Mr. Davidson?
Pretty short week with the holiday and everything, but in this week, Commissioner Didier and myself met with the fire chief of Fire District Number 3 about the upcoming meeting this week that we're having with all the fire districts up at Connell. It should be I've had several calls from some of the fire chiefs concerning it, and I think it'll be a good, useful tool for us to see if the interlocal agreement through all the fire districts can be amended, and we can rectify the issue, at least long-term, about the lack of EMT services that currently exist in Fire District Number 2. We had a budget update, once again, attended by Commissioner Didier and myself, with Tim Anderson and other key people here at the county. I think it's good. I'm glad to report that Tim will be conducting, starting in next month, a presentation once a month of the entire current expense budget up on the screen, so that you and the people here in the room can see each county department by department, and their expenditures and their budget and how well they're tracking throughout the year. So I think that this will be a good addition for transparency for next year with our general fund budget. I want to let the board know that I signed an emergency contract for security services over the Wilson House before it sold. We had some problems with people trying to sleep underneath it and stuff, and so we had to get some Phoenix Protection Services out there. As you probably saw, that house sold for $400,000, and we anticipate closing in the middle of next month, and so that contract will continue to pay for the security of that until it's actually been transferred to the new owners. I don't have any comparative data to give to you because it's so new, but I got several reports that the attendance at the Home and Garden event out at the Hapo Center was a great success. It's increasing since we've come out of COVID, and when I got more hard numbers to report to you, I will do that. The travel policy is going to the prosecuting attorney for legal review. It was updated just recently because of the 5 vehicles that were provided by the sheriff's office. We had to make a policy for those cars to be kind of like another mini pool, if you will. And so that'll be coming for your folks' review and hopefully approval very, very soon. Been preparing for the upcoming meetings this Thursday for Bi-County. I just got an amount from Benton County for the cost. They have revised downward to our favor the cost of a per patient or per client, I guess you would call it, services for the Veterans Court. For veterans that go through the court system, it's a lot favorable amount than what they first proposed, and I will shoot you an email tonight about what that amount was so that you have that and can contemplate that for the meeting on Thursday when we're meeting about these issues, and that's about it for me.
Thank you. Commissioner Peck?
Last week was another Wasatch Legislative Steering Committee meeting. So I was there Wednesday, Thursday. Couple of highlights out of that. The state received $15 million from the federal government to do a study on road usage charges in lieu of gasoline taxes. There's a lengthy briefing on it, and it's a topic that could take hours to discuss, but just to hit a few high points, the state is proposing something in the neighborhood of 2.5 cents per mile traveled on public roadways, that they would determine how many miles you drove based on odometer readings that you would self-report. They pitched pretty hard that privacy was their primary concern, so any sort of GPS and tracking would not be required. Some people might do it optionally. You would not be charged for miles driven on private land or miles driven out of state. The clear intent is to try and overcome the decline in gasoline sales and the reduced sales tax revenue that comes from those declining sales based on the number of electric vehicles that are coming on the road. It was made clear that there's no intent to apply this to vehicles that operate on diesel fuel, although I believe that's in the future. There's just a ton of additional information on the road usage charge, and if anybody is interested in following up on that, I can provide for you a set of slides that were provided by the Washington State Highway Commission Director on this particular subject. Second item of particular interest in the meetings was a bill, House Bill 1670, 1670, which proposes to increase the authority of this board and every other county council and board in Washington to increase your property taxes every year. It's currently capped at 1% of what we collected the year previous. So for every $100 we collected last year, we can currently collect 101 plus the value of new construction. This bill would change that and would say that we could collect that same 1%. We could also collect an increase based on population change, population increase. So if you had a 5% increase in population, theoretically, I'll explain more in a moment, but theoretically that would add another 5%. And if inflation was 10%, or let's say inflation was only 3%, theoretically you could add another 3%. The key and the important thing is that it was capped at 3% total. So between the 1% that already exists plus population growth plus inflation, you could do no more than 3% in a year. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Legislative Steering Committee for the state for the 39 counties. I was asked to go and give testimony, one of the committees on this bill. I declined. I don't support it. WASAC has taken a position somewhere between neutral and support. The counties vary widely on their opinions on this bill, but for two reasons. One, I think we need to live within our means. This is not a time with 10% inflation to be looking at trying to increase people's taxes. And two, I think it gives the legislature a ready opportunity every time we go to them and say, you mandated Office of Public Defense and these other 15 things that you, the state, are not paying for, and you should be. And when we do these kinds of increases through legislation, the answer we hear is, we're not going to pay for any of those things or give you any relief until you invoke the taxes for which we've already given you authority. So if we were to pass this 3%, they would say, we're not going to pay for your OPD or anything else until you enact the full 3%. I don't think it's time for an increase in taxes, and I don't want to give the legislature that excuse for not paying their fair share. On Friday, we had a lengthy Benton Franklin Council of Governments meeting, which we updated policies for this organization and bylaws, and went through new elections. It was fairly lengthy, 2.5 hour meeting, and that's probably enough for today. The legislature has, by the way, dropped something approaching 2,000 bills. Last count is about 1,800, and each and every one of those bills affects you in some way or another. And if you come across or people ask you about certain bills or things that are being proposed, feel free to email me on my county phone, and I'll do my best to get you the latest status from WASAC. Thanks.
Commissioner Mullen?
So, fielded several calls on the road tax, I'm sorry, the permitting process for the access to the highways. And the general consensus that I received from 100% of the people that did call me was, these are farm-to-market roads, and that's the purpose of them. And I think sometimes people forget that the farmers are the ones that are feeding all of us, and that it's basically an undue burden on the farmers, and the fact that the cost of the permits probably wouldn't even cover the cost of somebody going out there and looking at the site. So it ask the question, well, why are we doing this? Also had the health board meeting today where we interviewed the new candidates for the 1152 committee, and that is, we are expanding the people that are on the health board. Right now it sits at 3 commissioners from each county, and it looks like we're going to 2 commissioners from each county and 2 people from the public. So I think it's good that we get more public input, and I'm also relieved that we get to choose those people ourselves, and they're not being forced upon us by someone else. So anyways, that is my report for today. And we also, the candidates we had for the 1152 committee were outstanding. So it's nice to see that people are still willing to volunteer, and we couldn't have asked for a better group of people.
And Commissioner Mullin, if you don't mind, I'd just like to add a note to that. It was a good meeting, and you're correct, we're going to a total of 4 commissioners, 2 from each county, but I think you said there'd be 2 from outside. I think you were counting 2 for each county, but
Yes.
so it'll be a total of 4 commissioners and 4 outside.
That is correct.
I just wanted to clarify. I know you know that. I just wanted to clarify. Thanks.
Thank you.
So last week, my week consisted of the Fire District 3 meeting with Mr. Davidson, which was very well received by myself, because the fire marshal, and his name eludes me right now, what's his last name? Harris, did an outstanding job of really educating us that there's only 2 counties that doesn't have an EMS levy. We're one of them, and Benton County's the other. And so we're researching here because we have a dilemma. We have Fire District 2 that doesn't have any EMS, and so District 1 and District 3 are making up the slack in District 2, which is using up our resources, and our volunteers are getting fatigued. And so they're losing volunteers, our numbers are going down, and it's jeopardizing our services in our districts of 1 and 3. The budget review meeting was a very good meeting also, and I'm very happy to see that we're going to have a monthly review of every department's budget and how we're performing. I had the Columbia Basin Sustainable Water Coalition meeting, and again, it was talked about adjudication, which is the lawsuit that's coming forward right now on water rights. Whether we're the senior water right holder in the Columbia Basin or we're going to be a junior water right holder. Also, safe communities. Safe communities is where they're starting to monitor the water table, and if there's any pollutants, the number 1 polluter has been labeled as agriculture. Then I went to over to the west side on Friday and met with a bunch of legislators, and Mr. Davidson rode with me, and we had a good time discussing a lot of things in Franklin County, and we met with Andrew Barkus, who is on the Transportation Department, and met with him about our growth, and we could certainly use some more money for projects, especially another crossing across the Columbia River. So we had a really good meeting with him, and then, of course, the Wilson House sale. And the bill that Commissioner Peck is alluding to is 1832, and that's the one on mileage. This is something that's going to really be a detriment, and does that apply to gravel roads? Does that apply to county roads? I'm trying to figure out and how much money they're going to collect off this, and I know there's going to be a very bad situation because the road tax money, talking with Mr. Davidson, who's our ex-state treasurer, is tied to the bonds. So if we go to this mileage fee, where are these bondholders going to be let? Are they going to get repaid, or there's a lot of uncertainty here about all this talk of this road fee. Very troubling. So that's my report, and now we'll move on to regular business. And the first item on the regular business is a clarification of the pool barrier requirements. Mr. Bratton.
Thank you. Am I on? I can't tell. Okay. Thank you. This is a little unusual. Normally when I'm in here, I'm sitting down and I'm doing a presentation or something. However, on this one, the long story is that the IBC, the International Building Code, which is our building standard, has changed. We think it might have happened in 15, but definitely by 18, to where under that code, if you have a specific type of automatic safety cover on your pool, then you would not have to have an additional what we call 4-foot barrier. Otherwise, in the IBC, it's a 4-foot barrier. In our code, it's 5 foot, and that's the issue, and that's why I'm here today. When we adopted the 2018 code, for some reason, and this was done in March of 21, the entire section speaking to the adoption of the International Spa and Pool and Spa Code was repealed out of our text. And at the time, it wasn't a big deal. I mean, we'd had very few requests to do this exception. So what's the exception? Under the IBC, when you have this special pool cover, it's designed, but what makes it a safety cover is the fact that it can support 2 adults and a child's weight. And to get the exemption from the 4-foot barrier, you have to have an automatic one. It can't be a manual, it has to be an automatic system. The state adopted this appendix, the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code, the ISPSC. But then when we adopted 1512, the building code, that section had been stricken out. So I'm here before you to let you know that since that's occurred, we've been getting approximately 70 to 80% of our applicants for pools has requested this waiver. That's allowed under state law, but it's not allowed under Franklin County Code because our zoning code states that you shall do a 5-foot barrier. Because that barrier is higher than the requirements under the IBC, it trumps because we, as a jurisdiction, have a right to increase the requirements for our building codes, but we're not allowed to go below what the IBC's. So I have a conflict under state law, and the IBC and those subject matter experts have determined that one of these automatic barriers is an acceptable barrier without the 4-foot. Right now, regardless of what type of pool cover you have on your pool, our code requires you to put up a 5-foot barrier. Now, when I say a barrier, it could be a fence, it could be a glass wall, it could even be a natural elevation if you've got your pool jammed up and it's got a 4-foot, I apologize, I'm drawing a blank on my retaining wall. So, you come walking up on the property and the pool's up there. Even that would count. But so my question to the board is I want to know is, one, do you want to maintain that 5-foot barrier as it currently exists under the zoning code? Or would you like staff to go back and adopt the new or the other standard, which would be a 4-foot barrier, unless they have one of these specific automatic pool covers that meet the specific ASTM standards? And if that's your desire, that we amend the code, then I'll go back, I'll produce a new ordinance, and I'll bring that forward in that, utilizing the ordinance process. But if not, then, our code will sit and I don't need to do anything different. So I'm just looking for a consensus from the board as to what direction you'd like me to go in. If there is a change request, again, that change in code will be brought to you for final action. The building code falls under us. It doesn't go to the planning commission for approval. It's something that is under your purview as a body without a recommendation from the planning commission necessarily. Again, it's your code, so you can direct me as you'd like, but I'm looking for guidance as to whether that's something that the board wants to do. Right now, like I said before, when we repealed it, I'd say maybe 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10, we're making this request. It's completely flipped. About 70 to 80% of our pool applicants are now making the request to waive the fence. Reasons generally have to do with views. It interferes with the view or the look. It's an aesthetic concern. But as always, there's a recommendation. For me, I'm a planner. Safety's better. More safe, more better. But also, I'm not a subject matter expert when it comes to these specific items. That's what the the Washington Code Council's for, and those folks that do building. So they have stated that this barrier is comparable, and so hence I'm here today, because, yep, I'm here to protect the life and safety, but I also need to make sure that y'all are aware of new trends that have occurred since we may have done something, so. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I personally have never done it this way either, so.
Questions, commissioners?
Just for clarification, you're talking height of the fence, not distance.
Yes,
from the
I
pool.
apologize, yes, it's a 4-foot high barrier, yeah.
And the automatic cover, that is an exemption regardless if it's 4 foot or 5 foot?
If you, under the IBC, if you have the automatic cover, you don't need an additional 4-foot barrier. That cover acts as your barrier to protect it.
Okay.
Primary purpose of the fence is to keep kids out
Sure.
and other folks from getting in. They at least have to go through an effort, because pools are considered attractive nuisances. So you have to do reasonable things to ensure that only people that are supposed to be in the pool are in the pool. And that's where the barrier came from. The new pool covers apparently provide that same protection. Your packets, you had a spec, that was just a general. There are a million different types of these pool covers out there. The key is the meeting of the ASTM 34 or F1346 standard. That's the key part. If they don't do that and they're not automatic, they would still have to put in at least a 4-foot barrier.
I see Mr. Davidson would like to.
Just for
If I
clarification.
might, Chairman, I'd like for the board to have an opportunity to speak first. It's appropriate.
Go ahead, Commissioner Peck.
Thank you. Derek, am I correct that the underlying premise and purpose, whether it's for a self-closing gated fence or a barrier or an automatic cover, is safety and to prevent largely accidental drowning?
That's the primary, yeah.
Okay, all right. So the 4-foot versus 5-foot barrier thing is just difference between us and the state. I get that. I don't really think that's the issue. I think the issue is whether or not an automatic cover really provides the intended safety. Automatic covers, when they're closed, are very durable, and they've been shown to hold a couple of adults and a kid, which is the requirement. But I don't hear anybody speaking to those days when that cover is open and there's no one there actively supervising. And because it's an automatic cover, you don't have to have an enclosure or a fence or a barricade or anything else. And so now you have a pool that's sitting open potentially all day in the middle of summer, because here in the Tri-Cities, pools get hot enough that people leave them uncovered to actually lose some heat. So with that in mind, is there any requirement that you're aware of in the IBC or in the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code? I think that, yeah, that's the correct title. That requires, when you're going to use your automatic cover as sufficient safety, that you don't need another barrier? Is there anything that requires that to be closed when there's no one there supervising?
That would be that's the assumption, the presumption under the code from when I read it.
So I
It's
didn't
assumed,
see,
but
I haven't seen anything in that code that speaks to that. Are you saying that it does?
They don't, no, they don't. I mean, the building codes don't really speak to owner behavior, I guess. In other words, the building code can't tell a person what to do or what to not do on their property. All it can do is say, these are the minimum requirements for building.
Yeah, so if you've got an automatic pool cover, you don't have to have a fence, you don't have to have a retaining wall, you don't have to have that 4 or 5 foot barrier. It seems to me that we're actually running the risk of reducing safety, not increasing it. When the cover is closed, I would agree it's safe. But when it's open, unless there's someone there supervising the whole time, now you've got an open pool with no fence, no barrier, no retaining wall, no nothing. And I think that falls right into the attractive nuisance concept, that it's available, it's accessible, it's attractive. They put trampolines in the same category. So if I'm understanding, and it sounds like I am, that it is either have a enclosure, and we can talk 4 feet versus 5 feet, that doesn't really matter. You either have an enclosure or you have an automatic cover. I don't think the automatic cover, because I believe it's going to be left open, is sufficient. If the objective is protect public safety and keep kids from drowning, I don't think it meets the sanity check for me. Thanks.
Mr. Davidson?
I just wanted clarification. I thought that the secondary 4-foot wall was secondary. I thought there had to be a perimeter fence around the pool. So there's no fence if you have the pool cover at all? Or, I mean, just,
That's what the IBC states.
and what percentage of the pools being put in now have covers?
The automatic safety covers, like I said, about 75 to 80 of the application. Now, what happens is, then we'll tell them, hey, you need to put up the 4-foot fence, or the 5-foot fence, because that's what we have now. Some proceed with the automatic cover and the fence, others drop the cover, or various other options, but usually 80%. And it's I mean, these are not cheap covers. We're talking anywhere from 6 to 10 to 20,000, depending on the size of your pool, the shape, style, and various other variables. So, but that's an option. I mean, if a party decided, no, I don't want to do the automatic, they're not required to do that, they would have to put in the barrier. Or if they wanted to do a manual one, they would have to put in the barrier. But if they do that automatic one, like I said, this is the ISPC, the IBC, and applicant requests. So I'm doing a check-in. So it's whatever direction you guys want me to go in.
How many requests are you getting for not having a barrier with their automatic pool cover?
Well, like right now, I want to say we had 6 last year, and 5 of those had that request.
Wow, okay. I'll just,
2, I only am aware of 2 though right now that are, I know of one that's got the automatic and he's going to be doing a fence, and I've got another one who's waiting the answer.
I'll just say from personal experience that a fence is not a bad idea. A cover will not sustain the weight of livestock. So that might be something in consideration where you
I hadn't even
live.
thought of that.
Saw the pictures.
I hadn't even thought of that. And no, they do not speak to livestock, so it only speaks to
Saw the pictures.
If you live in an area with agriculture, cattle, you may want to consider that. It's not fun.
So who's the enforcing agent here on this
For
in our
which
county?
aspect?
You have to make sure that somebody has a fence or has a cover.
It's done during the pool application process, so they submit for their pool permit.
Gotcha.
And then on the final inspection, that's one of the things that we're checking is that the 5-foot barrier is there, and then the systems work the way they're supposed to.
So if somebody already has a pool in place, then they're grandfathered in without having to do it?
Generally speaking, yeah, I would
Okay.
have to say. But just so you know, this has been in place since 11, I think it was. The 5-foot barrier. 2011 was the last time we looked at that section.
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly.
And besides livestock, this has also got wild game, and that 4 and 5 foot fence won't stop a wild anything jumping over it. So now I'd like to address something that I read in the background, and that is the IBC is also used by most finance and insurance companies to determine whether a structure being financed and insured meets minimum safety and construction standards. If the structure was not built to this standard, then they often deny financing, or they may not pay on an insurance claim. This is why tribes in Washington State often have buildings such as casinos and other public facilities designated and inspected by the IBC standard, even though they are exempt from Washington State and local permitting requirements.
It's the standard that's used by financing agencies and insurance companies.
So I don't know where the commission wants to go with this.
Well, Derek, I'll just offer that by nature, I'm inclined to go with the least regulation possible. But to me, it's only takes one toddler drowning in a pool in Franklin County to make a person wish that they'd said, you know, fences are a good idea, we ought to stay with them. I just don't, I know a number of people, including my own family members, who have automatic pool covers. They leave them wide open for days and days and days and days. And if there's no impediment to your next door neighbor's toddler wandering over and drowning in your pool, why, yeah, I think the way you've got it now is fine, but I'm not entirely sure that I see a justification for requiring a 5-foot fence versus a 4-foot, 5-foot being our county standard, 4-foot being the state standard. So maybe you could articulate for me, if there is a reason that you know of, why we're 5 and the state's 4.
I
Because
don't
if
have a
there,
reason.
if sight
Higher is
lines,
bigger, better, I don't know.
well, sure, I think higher is better in this case, but really I think we're trying to keep toddlers out, not teenagers.
Generally speaking.
Teenagers will go over a 5-foot fence. It's toddlers I worry about. So I think it would, for a reasonable person, I think you could get to the 4-foot standard, and that might help alleviate some of the sightline concerns that people have expressed about fences around their pools.
And standard fence heights tend to be, say, 32, 40, 3 foot and 4 foot. You don't see a lot of 5 foot. Now, one thing going on with fencing too on these barriers is a standard, for example, chain link fence is not acceptable because that hole's too big and people kids can climb over it. Teenagers can get over these other ones too,
Sure.
but it's, so if they're doing chain link, they do require a special mesh. Then for your, say, wrought iron or wrought iron style, you can't have what they call vertical fencing. Nothing more than a 4-inch ball cannot pass through those, so it's got to be smaller than 4 inches. But again, the height thing is 4 foot is more standard as far as a minimum barrier across jurisdictions.
I'm just thinking it might alleviate some of the sightline concerns, reduce cost a little bit.
Yeah, because your average person, adult at least, is over 5 foot, or
Yeah.
over 4 foot.
But I would say leave everything like it is, or if we want to make a change, go from 5 to 4, but that's about as far as I would go.
Okay,
I would concur with that as well. I mean,
okay.
And I'd just like to add that a fence has to have a gate to get access. If the gate's left open, the fence is worthless.
The fence is
Automatic
required
closing.
to have self-locking, so just like our gates out here,
So it automatically closes.
it's supposed to.
They have to have automatically closing gates.
That's part of what we check in that final inspection on the fencing, is to make sure that that gate actually does self-close.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to go with a 4-foot fence.
Okay. I'll put together something, because it's in our zoning code, it's got to go to the planning commission and through that process. So I will look at that. I will get their recommendation from the planning commission regarding reducing that height down to 4 foot, and I'll bring that back to you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll move down to the proposed public works fee schedule packet.
Good evening. At the request of the board, I've brought back the promote permit fee schedule. We had proposed a schedule to cover some of the incurred costs that we have for processing approach permits. And as discussed in the other 2 meetings, we presented our fee along with data from other counties as to what they charge. I don't really have anything further to add from what was stated in the earlier meetings. And I guess I'm willing to answer whatever questions you have, if you wish to pursue it further.
Questions, commissioners?
Well, Craig, I've got a few observations more than questions. I think RCW 36.75.130 is pretty clear. It says the benefited party pays the cost. It's clear the benefited party is the person who is making their way to and from the public roadway. Two, even the fees that you're proposing don't cover the full cost. Statute says we're supposed to recover the full cost. I'm not hung up on that, but I want people to know that they're not being overcharged. I note that some of the counties that have lower fees haven't adjusted those fees in more than a quarter of a century in at least one case. Adams County hasn't touched theirs, it doesn't look like, since the 90s. 20 out of 20 of the counties that were considered all have fees. There were some comments earlier this evening about who owns the road and who doesn't, and right-of-ways. And unless I'm missing something, the county's right-of-way and its duty under the statute to recover these costs leaves us two options. Do what you're proposing or ignore the law. I don't see another option there. There was a comment about a 4 a.m. phone call to come and harvest corn, but am I correct that if somebody's got a field that they're going to be intending to harvest at some point in the future, that there's no prohibition on them taking care of the permit months in advance?
No, and these permits are really rather rare. We've done 3 in the last 3 years.
Okay.
And they are for large-scale operations. We're not talking about daily use of going to feed cattle or short-term harvest that's only a few days. We're looking at things that are large processing going on that's going to send several hundred trucks onto the road over a period of time. Like I said, they're relatively rare. We've done 3 in the last 3 years.
And you're making a distinction there about the size of these. Is that spelled out somewhere in statute, or is that just you taking a more relaxed approach to it, not requiring a permit for everything?
Well, I think our policy kind of addresses it, but yeah, it's a soft policy, so.
Well, let me ask it another way. Do the statutes distinguish between approach permits that are going to get used for a week versus ones that are going to be used for 2 months?
No, our policy distinguishes it mostly in their construction standards. They're not meant to be there long-term, so they have a lower standard. Currently, as our policy is now, once the temporary approach is removed, the deposit is refunded. So it's a net zero for the owner.
So how does that work when the statute requires you to recover your costs? You're going to incur costs in doing this. If there's a fee paid and then it's returned, how does that cover any of your costs?
Well, we're into an area which is, as I stated in the previous meetings, it is not explicit, at least in my view, in RCW 3675-130. I think a broad interpretation of that law, yes. Does it preclude us from having a permit schedule? No, it doesn't. In fact, I think it supports us having one. But, it depends on what the interpretation of the law is. I'm an engineer, I'm not a lawyer. I tend to be very conservative, which means I take sometimes a broader view of what the law would state, because I'm looking to protect the county from liability. And if there is any hint that we are gifting county funds, which is essentially what would happen if we do work for other people and are not reimbursed for it, that is outside the county road system. That is one example of where that it is. And we have issues where that can pop up if it's not covered. So I take a conservative view to protect the liability of the county. I don't want us to ever be in that position. That being said, I said, the law doesn't state it explicitly. I think it could be interpreted that way. Is it being interpreted that way? I don't know. I
Well, let
couldn't
me-
find any case law to support it one way or the other.
Yeah, let me just read a couple lines out of 3675, 130. And it's the end of the sentence that really is important. It says, "No person shall be permitted to build or construct any approach to any county road without first obtaining permission therefore from the board."
That's correct.
Right? So
That's
it's
RCW.
this board that gives the permission. And then in paragraph 2 of the same statute, it says the construction of approaches, culverts, fills, et cetera, shall be under the supervision of the county road engineer, which is you, and all such construction shall be at the expense of the person benefited by the construction. I don't like fees and permits any more than anybody else, but to me, this is pretty black and white language. Thanks.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Erdman, I've got that whole RCW 36.75.130. And paragraph 2 starts off by saying, "The board of several counties of the state may adopt reasonable rules for the construction of approaches which, when compiled with, shall entitle a person to build or construct an approach from any abrupting property to that county road. The rules may include provisions." May is a big word here in this whole
It
thing.
is.
It's up to our discretion.
As they are most things.
So my question to you is, this paved approach, was this voted on by a previous Board of Commissioners?
Yes, I believe it is part of the previous 2 approach policies,
Which were voted on when?
2012 and 2014, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, before our time. So we could readdress those. And the way this fee schedule looks from all these counties, it's all over the board.
I
And Mr.
agree.
Davidson pointed this out. There is no, there,
And it is completely to the board's discretion as to what you wish the fee schedule to be, from 0 to whatever.
yeah, there's no uniformity here as far as, and therefore, I'm sort of looking at, do we even have this ability to impose fees? Because they're talking about the construction costs, not administrative fees. Those are two different
Well,
things.
that's where we come into the gray area of law.
Yes.
In most cases, well, for example, when we go out for construction, the paying permits to the state, to the federal government, that's part of our cost of construction. When people build homes, they have to obtain permits to build their homes. That is part of their construction costs. So, as I said, the law does not state it explicitly, excuse me, my mouth's getting a little dry, explicitly, but I do believe it supports us having a fee schedule.
You believe. I mean, it doesn't state it in there. And I've even went clear back to the, in 82,
No, thank you.
1982 is when we passed this resolution, 82-12, permitting this. And it had nowhere in here it says anything about fees or permits.
Well, back in 82, clear back when I started in 91,
Yeah.
approaches were not, we didn't do a lot of them. We didn't do a lot of approach permits. The area hadn't taken off like it has. Over the last several years, that load has increased greatly on the Public Works Department. Whereas we would do, a handful a month now, we're probably averaging 1 or 2 every working day. That, and that's just the beginning of the process. It has to be the permit gone through. We have to do our inspections, so on and so forth, and improve the permit. So it's a process, and over the years, that cost is, as we've shown in the read heads, has gone up. I mean, we basically have a full-time employee that's dedicated to doing permit work. where that wasn't the case clear back when I started. But because of the growth of the county and the amount of work that we're getting in that area, and we
So
were
you have a full-time employee designated just for this?
not totally designated for this, but they spend a lot of their time.
Did we lose this signal? Okay, go ahead, Greg.
Okay, I'm sorry, we have to remember where we were at. I got a little distracted there.
Well, we were talking about your full-time employee that's
Well,
already
yeah,
accounting for all this.
well, we have several, we have 8 people in the engineering staff, and various people touch the permits, but there's one person that's kind of central to that, and that's probably, I would say, 75% of her duties is to deal with approach permits. She also deals with construction permits and other right-of-way issues.
Okay, and then when I looked through this fee schedule from these other counties, Adams is at 25, Ferry's at 60, Grant's at 50, Clititat's at 50. And then there are counties like Stevens that only has commercial, only one fee for commercial. Like I said, it's all over the board. There's no uniformity here for these, and I don't think that since we already are collecting taxes and we're issuing these construction costs onto the landowner, I think we're good just where we're at. I would encourage my commissioners not to impose these fees onto our county residents, because if they own land out there, they're paying taxes already.
So a couple of observations. One, the fact that the statute says we may have a policy does not relieve the county of its obligation to, one, ensure that approaches are done with the permission of the board. So if we don't have a policy, it means in each case it would come to the board on a case-by-case basis. Nor does the word may relieve us of the obligation to collect the cost of doing that, because it's a cost to the taxpayers at large of the county for an individual property owner being benefited. So while may is interesting, we may have a policy. If we choose not to have a policy, then I believe it requires each one to come to the board, which I'm fine with. I would just offer, for those of you who remember the accident out at Taylor Flats and South Landing Road, the design and construction and changes to roadways can bring safety risks and significant liability on the county. And part of the reason that I believe counties and the state are so diligent about the rules for any changes to our roadways is to make sure that we're not creating significant safety hazards, whether it's sight distances around curves, like we had out by, I forget the gentleman's name now. Anyway, or it's putting a driveway too close to an intersection and a stop sign where somebody comes out of that approach and gets nailed by a car coming
Yes,
through the
that's-
intersection. There's any number of scenarios, and I think one of the chief reasons for having approach permits is so that the county can go out and look at the situation and say, yeah, this is a safe place to put one, and what you're doing looks fine, and you're good to go. If we do that and something happens, then it's on us. If someone goes and builds an approach without a permit, or we tell them, don't worry about it, you don't need a permit, and something like that happens, we, the county, are going to be liable. And if anyone doubts that, I'd refer you to our legal team to explore joint and several liability and how that works in Washington. That's what happened to us. Not a perfect analogy, but it's similar to what happened out at South Landing. We didn't do anything wrong there. We had a very well-marked intersection, and somebody blew through the stop sign and hit a car. So I think that's one of the things that hasn't been discussed, is that it's the property owner that gets the liability protection when the county does the permit and signs off. If they don't, and they don't have a permit, it's going to be on them. So, thanks.
First of all, I'd just like to say, I appreciate everything you do for Franklin County, and I do appreciate the fact that you're concerned about the roadways and the maintenance of them. You know, we're fortunate to have you working here at Franklin County. I believe that the temporary access permit is too vague, and that I'm of the opinion that agricultural use should have an exemption, because anyone that's farming out there is not going to drive their truck for the access off of the road. They're not going to want to tear up their own equipment, their trucks. I think that the majority of farmers are going to make that easement as smooth as possible and with with minimal damage to the roadway. And again, I think that the whole temporary access is just, it's too vague. I mean, who decides what's temporary and what is not?
Well, the permit actually determines that. There's, at least in the policy we're coming up, it's 24 months, and the approach must be removed. And it's usually constructed more of dirt and rock, and it's made to be temporary. Mm-hmm. The one thing that is, I believe, is critical for us to have it is that we have some say in where it is placed. We do not want approaches on the road that are going to provide a hazard for the driving public. And you can put an approach in a place where people can't see it, and it's a sight distance hazard. So this gives us an opportunity to at least look. Whether we charge for this permit or not, that's fine. And like I said, we're not talking about short-term harvest. Most fields have some form of permanent approach to them already. These are special ones, like I said, for what I would term a large operation that's going to be there for a while, with several hundred trucks. You know, if you're processing carrots or potatoes or whatever, and it's going to be a while, and there's going to be several trucks moving on there, we want that approach to be in a safe place and built properly for that. That saves both the farmer and the county some risk and liability.
Okay. Well, I know there's been instances where the farming process, they'll load the trucks on the road rather than taking access off to the highway. And then there's complaints from neighbors about the road being blocked.
Well, you're getting into law enforcement territory here.
Right.
You know,
But I still contend that the major purpose of those county roads out there is to get the farm to market.
and I am not arguing that in the least.
Okay.
I am just trying to protect those farm to market roads.
Sure. No, I understand that.
And the people that use them.
Right.
Greg, you say we only get about 3 of these in what period of time? 3 a year? Or?
No, it's 3 over 3 years, so about 1 a year. You know,
So maybe we ought to just take them as they come.
yeah.
If it's only going to be 1 a year, I think the board can handle that workload to evaluate whether or not there's a need for it, a requirement. Save you a lot of trouble trying to create a policy. It could be pretty simple.
So as far as the discussion here earlier about the legal, it says right here in our policy 8212, no building permit shall be issued until the county engineer has issued a valid approach permit or it has been determined that the existing access meets current county design standards. So you're going to give the okay for any of these approaches.
Well, that's the delegation that the board gave in 8212 and
Exactly.
has not been repealed in subsequent approach policies.
Isn't that for a structure? Did I hear that?
That's for, '8212 delegated all of the approach to the county, all the approaches to the
No,
county.
I understand, but in the section that Commissioner Didier just read, it sounded like that was, they shall not issue building permits without there first being an approach permit.
That's what it says.
And that's,
Yeah, and
that's a
that's been
different,
consistent
it's
through
a
our
different
policy.
scenario than harvesting a field and having an approach
Right, the
permit.
temporary approach
Yeah.
is a different,
Well, I was
Different beast.
alluding to the lawsuit that we're going to get sued. Talked illegal. As Commissioner Peck said, that if we don't put these in the right spot, we'll get sued. So I'm saying that there is no building permits unless you give the okay.
right, and that's one of the elements that we use to control that.
Exactly.
I think maybe the clarification here, the building permit, I think that's being referenced is for structures, for homes, for barns,
Right,
for shops.
that would be
It's-
in
it's not
coordination with the
for-
planning department.
It's not for driving a harvest vehicle on and off the county road.
No.
It's two
and-
different,
and
two
farm
different
approaches
permit scenarios.
are, yeah.
Yeah, and our legal counsel's here. I mean, if you want to hear from them.
No, I don't.
As to whether or not, well, I would like to.
Well, we're
Since-
having a
since-
discussion right now with Mr.
Well,
Erdman.
I understand, and we can do it in
Okay,
due
we can
course.
listen to that later. I have more questions for Mr. Erdman.
Okay,
if you're
good, but
finished.
I would like us to hear that after Mr. Erdman's finished.
So on these 3 permits, does that mean the rest of the farmers out there that are utilizing an access that's not okayed by you are in jeopardy of getting a fine? Or
The
misdemeanor
RC
is what this
It's a
says.
misdemeanor.
Yeah.
And we do have outlaw approaches in the county. We occasionally have people that take it upon themselves to do it. We find them, we give them a letter and contact them and let them know that they need to remove them, or come in and get a permit and bring them up to county standards. Some counties are rather punitive about that. Columbia County, I believe, it was pretty significant if you went and built an approach and then came in and get your permit. They doubled or tripled the cost of the permit.
So are all these approaches requiring a culvert?
No, that depends on the circumstance. Culverts are specific to the drainage need of the road attached. There are
Right,
some places
because-
where it's not required and other places where it is.
Because
And
I was
that's-
gonna say the
That's one
counties-
of our determinations when we look at it.
Because if it is, then the county's out of compliance with culverts, because there's roads out there with no culverts, county roads, and it is ponding and jeopardizing in these last 2 floods we had. And I've went over them with you. Those are all the questions I have.
So the approach permit, that's usually triggered by someone else getting a permit, maybe for building that's over a certain dollar amount, is that correct?
Yes, and in the current policy that we're bringing forward, we're raising that limit from 25,000 to 35,000. New residents is triggered automatically, but any work that it used to be a low threshold of 25,000 would trigger a new approach permit. And now we're proposing to raise that to 35,000.
All right. Well, it's of my idea that we table this for further discussion to get it straightened out exactly what it's going to be. I mean, I understand your concerns as far as making sure everything is legal, but I guess I'm not comfortable with the permit process or the permit fees.
So are we talking about just the permit fee part of this being tabled? Or are we
Well, I
talking
also
about
think
the
that
approach
the-
policy as well?
The temporary access is too vague. Or I think there should be an exemption for agricultural use. Rather than, if it's something like a big facility coming in, it's on permanent use where there's going to be, 20, 30 trucks a day going in. Well, I can see a permitting process and make sure that we protect the county's roads in that respect. But like Mr. Peck said, if it's only one a year, maybe we just take it upon ourselves. I mean, I'm not trying to.
No, that's a completely, that's the board's prerogative. I have no issue with it one way or the other. It hasn't been really much of an issue.
Okay. That's my thought on it, so.
So is it my understanding the board would wish to have these two items pulled and brought back at a later date?
I think so, because probably the county road approach policy needs to be more, because I already read from it here. And I'd like to, probably like to indulge in it even further, because these work hand in hand, and I'm not for any increase in fees for the county residents, so I can make a decision on that right now, but the county road approach policy, I would like to readdress the fact that we're making residents pay $6,000 for a paved approach.
The county does not make them pay.
No,
That's a private transaction with them and their contractor. I understand the process is expensive, and I'm not
But we're-
arguing it, but I just wanted to be clear on that point. County is not making them pay what, that's between them and the contractor.
well,
We're
Craig,
requiring that it be paved.
yes, you're requiring it that it be paved, because I just did some work for a gentleman that had to pave it, and he put a house in for his mom and dad, and one of his siblings and their husband, so that they can take care of him. And he had to pay $6,000 to put a paved approach on a road that isn't even an all-weather roadway. And I've already went over this with you,
Well,
which
and
is, to
I've
me,
al-
is completely ludicrous, because if you make it all-weather, you're expanding the shoulders and you're taking it out further, his approach is gonna get tore up. Or it isn't gonna be satisfactory, because you're gonna be intruding on his approach.
Purpose of having the paved approach does two things. First of all, it keeps gravel, dirt, and other debris from getting on the roadway and causing a potential hazard to the driving public. That's job number one. Job number two, having that paved approach on that paved road helps protect that road and preserve it longer. Those are the two primary reasons that we do that, regardless of whether it is an all-weather road or a local access road. You make a pretty strong argument. I think that if the local access roads, it's probably even more critical that they be paved, just because the cycle for preservation on those roads is longer than it is on majors and minors. But that is my opinion.
Craig, do you have some idea of how these approach permits are handled within the city, within Pasco?
No, I'm not really familiar with how the approach permits work in the city. I would assume that they're similar, but probably more complex. They have a lot more moving parts to deal with than we do. Curbs, gutters, storm
Maybe.
sewer systems.
Yeah, maybe sounds like we're going to have continuing discussion, dialogue on this. Maybe, I don't expect you to be an expert in what the city does, but if you could have a sense of that, it's 70-80% of the population of the county. And just thinking it might be appropriate to at least consider the notion of treating all of our citizens equitably. If you're going to have permits in areas that are, being developed by 70-80% of the population, then maybe that's the basis for treating everybody equitably and the same.
So what happens in the case of, let's say you have a access onto the county road that you've had for 20, 30 years, and now you build a shop that's $45,000, and now you're required to put an apron in?
Yes.
Does that, there's no more traffic.
No, when originally the paved part of this came in, if I recall correctly, I was not the engineer when this happened. You know, the board decided to grandfather in existing approaches because it didn't seem fair to just all of a sudden make everybody go out and pave an approach. So that's hence why there are certain trigger points in there for existing approaches. Now, if the approach already conforms to county standard, then that's where it ends. We're good. We sign off on it and we move on. But if if it doesn't meet current standards, then we ask that it be updated.
But no, if somebody does further development on that land after it's been grandfathered in, then they have to get an approach
Yes,
permit.
if they do significant development on it, yes, they do.
I think we ran into a case where somebody just put a $45,000 improvement on their property, and then they get hit with another $6,000 apron, and
I understand that.
that's quite excessive. You know, I mean, I wish it wasn't so.
Me too.
Yeah.
But, like I said, we're trying to protect the public and preserve the roadway.
Sure.
I don't know if the commissioners are ready to make a move on any of this, or do we want to postpone it and table it to a further date?
I think we should table it with more discussion on it to a later date.
Ms. Milham?
I'm fine with tabling it, and if we're going to table it, there will be future opportunities for legal to speak to the inherent liabilities surrounding these, so we can do that then as well as tonight. I'm good either way.
Ms. Milham?
Yes, this came before the board back in December, and I'm just trying to help our engineer here. You've talked about topic A and C, or B and C?
B and C.
At the same time, so it's kind of intermingled. Might I ask the board to give the engineer, instead of just table it, some information that he knows what to do? What do you want to do with this? Because when you table it, he has no understanding of what you're wanting.
Well,
So do you want him to get more legal? Do you want him to, you're not giving him enough information of,
I would like to have an open hearing with the public to weigh in on it, so that we might have open public hearings. so that-
are we
on
talking about the fee
both,
or?
Both.
Okay,
I think it's only fair that our public gets to weigh in on this, because we're talking about a lot of fees, an approach. We're talking about temporary access. It looks like it's going to infringe on everybody who harvests fields, because I don't know who's going to enforce it, but it sounds like we're going to be out there, and if you enter the road 3 or 4 times, they're going to,
I've stated over and over, no, that is not the case.
well, how can we only have 3 temporary permits when we have all of that?
Large operations.
Well, I know they're all over out there, Craig.
I honestly, I'll be frank, I don't know, I don't get involved in the approach process every day in the building. I have staff that takes care of that. We did 3. I don't know what the circumstances of those particular 3 were, but I'll find out.
I'll tell you right now, there's a lot of people not in compliance, and they're going to get fined.
I understand that. Then there's,
If we make this determination, and that's why it's very
And
important.
I think there's
I
more
understand
discussion
that.
on it, and I do appreciate everything you do for Franklin County. I've worked with you in the past, and you've always been more than available and willing to work on it. So, I mean, I hope this is, I'm not
No,
taking it
forgive me if I
personally.
show some frustration. It's just, I'm frustrated because I don't feel like I'm getting things properly communicated to you, and that's on me.
I think you're communicating very clearly.
Yeah.
I
just
think
need
we
more
all
time.
understand exactly what you're saying. It's just some of us maybe perhaps appreciate it more than others.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So thank you, Mr. Erdman.
Okay, thank
We'll
you.
look forward to maybe having an open public meeting on this.
Very well. I would like to request that I have plenty of
Yes,
heads up on that.
we will. We'll have plenty of heads up, plenty of time to get prepared. All right, next we'll move down to administration office business. Mr. Davidson, nothing? Okay, we have our second public comment. Is there anybody for public comment?
Yes, thank you. When I'm looking at RCW 36.75.130, under lawjustia.com and also the Washington app for the legislature, it says its approaches to county roads, rules regarding construction. In other words, if a big construction I don't know, housing development or any kind of development, these temporary approaches are for the construction equipment. This has nothing to do with agriculture. I think somebody needs to speak to someone who is actually a legislator to make sure and clarify that, because I don't think this has anything to do with agriculture. I think it has everything to do with what Commissioner Mullen said, that it's for temporary construction of construction vehicles that come in. There's nothing temporary about a farm. You are working that farm all year round. If you're not working on equipment, you're spraying, you have different, even in the winter, you have to spray certain chemicals to non-emergents, and there's actually bugs and things. So you are out there, and all of these are large farm operations. I would like to know who this one farmer is that's paying for such a large, because my husband works for Allied Potato. It's one of the largest in our area. They've never done this. And as I said, my husband's family's been farming for 58 years. The Buse is longer than that. I think the Didier's a long time as well. It's not, I really believe this is for construction. It has nothing to do with agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else for public comment?
So Commissioners, if you roll back that $6,000 construction fee, I want to be reimbursed because I paid those when I built a shop on my property, and those access fees. And so if you're going to change them for the rest of the county, you need to make sure I get reimbursed.
You live in the city, correct?
Nope.
Nope.
I'm in the county.
That way, all students that are paying their debt and paid it off, now they're forgiven, they won't get reimbursed, guaranteed. So it won't work. Anyway, once again, Kurt Didier, it's from Mr. Erdman, right?
Yes, sir.
You've had very good comments, a very good presentation. Some of the things I have a problem with is not necessarily what you're talking about. One thing I have a problem with, and this comes back to Mr. Peck about talking about legal counsel. I can go out and within 3 rows of my house, I can show you 4 approaches in my books that have never been approved, where houses are constructed on curves, and the approach is right on a curve that you cannot see if you're on the other side of the house coming around the corner. How did that get approved? I'm sure the guy paid for the approach, and the county, somebody came out there and said, yeah, that's a great approach. And I'm sitting there, I come around the corner, and holy heck, here's the car pulling out of his garage is only, well, I don't know, what's the setback, 10 feet of your easement right away? I mean, that's where his garage is at. And it's like, and that's what we're talking about, these approaches and somebody okaying them. And I can go out here and show the ones that were okayed, and I don't know when they were okayed. I'm pretty sure you weren't in charge at that time, but somebody okayed it and should have never been okayed. The second thing, I guess, rather than approaches, the biggest thing I have a problem with as a county resident, and I've told my guys I'd hit them in the head with the back of the hammer, is, and I ain't trying to throw farmers under the bus, but these farmers that turn their equipment on the road when they come out the field and turn on the road. That does more damage than your approach deal ever dreamed of. More damage. And I feel that's the man's job in his community to come out and fine them for doing that. Because I have to drive those roads, and I got a pickup, and those things nowadays are anywhere from 75 to 120,000, and just beating my brains in because people feel they got to turn their equipment, not just drive up and down the road, but I mean actually turn it on the road. And that's the biggest problem I have. That's never been addressed one iota. And back to the other deal, I as a farmer have been, I wouldn't call it fine, but I sent a bill a number of times by the county for any damage that I had done to the road. So rather than having the fee, if you find out that somebody's entering the road and doing the damage, you fine them or fee them or give them a bill, whatever the scenario. Like I said, it's been 2 or 3 times I've been sent bills. Mine's not for entering the road, it's for my water, my main line broke, washed out the side of the road, they had to fix it, and next thing I know, that I didn't even get told, I just get the bill in the mail, so, anyway.
Anybody else for public comment?
This is on a completely different subject, but I just wanted to announce that the interviews for the county administrator are coming up on Monday, starting at 9:30. These are closed interviews, 9:30 to approximately 3:30. Then from 5 to 6, local officials and city employees are invited. And then from 6 to 7, the public has a meet and greet.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Anybody on the phone? Got somebody else coming to the mic.
Jason Broberg, Connell. Mr. Diddy, you were talking about the 82-10, where it was talking about the procedure for a building permit. What was the first one you said? Was the approach?
The RCW?
That the approach had to be permitted first, or had to be approved first?
That's in our policy that we're looking to approve.
Okay, so my last project I was involved in was a machine shed that was built, permitted, on a piece of ground that was used to store machinery anyway, so it incurred no new traffic. The building permit finalization got hung up, and you know what the last thing was that got hung up? We had to put an approach in. So where is the checklist? Why were we allowed to do this entire project permitted and the approach was done last? And it ended up being, so our shop was on the end of a dead-end road. The end of the dead-end road was crumbled away so bad that the company we hired to put in this approach had to take an additional part of the road out to get to good road. That added money into what we had to pay for the approach. So, again, it's a very subjective thing that we're dealing with here. It's not like some perfect county road. So we got a bid, they came out, they did the job, they said we had to cut a whole bunch more out, we had to put more gravel in, a whole bunch more asphalt, just so that the county could come out and stamp it. And it was the last thing done, not the first thing. So, thank you.
Nobody on the phone? Nobody else for public comment?
Just one more added thing is that what we are talking about are 2 different things here. When you are constructing something and you are putting in, and you've got machinery and equipment, that's what this particular RCW is for. RCW 36.75.130, approaches to county roads, rules regarding construction. Agriculture is not construction. Now, you may build something on your farm, and then building codes and everything apply. But we're talking about year-round uses of farm ground and farm equipment and county roads that are, as the other Mr. Didier stated, is because the farmer owns that. In fact, farmers are actually obligated to maintain those roads before they are paved. And the county says, we will come in and maintain snow and any pitfalls if you pay the initial cost to have it asphalted. And when a farmer does that, his property taxes actually go up. So he is paying more for the county to maintain the roads that he initially paid for. So this RCW has to do with construction. And as Amazon is an example, and you have all that equipment, they have to pay extra fees and costs to be able to run that equipment on roads that weren't designed for construction equipment. This has nothing to do with agriculture.
Thank you. Anybody else for public comment?
Well, personally, I don't farm out there. Personally, I don't have an approach. I just drive off the road and go up to my house. But farmers are not going to just drive off the side of the road. I think you guys and go out in the field. They don't want to tear it up either. They don't want a bunch of tracks going out across their ground. I think you're taking the wrong approach. The approach that Mr. Erdman's talking about is for people going out there and putting a new house up or a building or whatever it is, they need a legal approach. I think it's crap that you got to pay that much, but that's what it's for. They're not going to go out there, and Sheriff Raymond's not going to stop some guy from pulling off the road with his harrow bed to go out there in the field and pick up a load. So I think you're misinterpreting the intent of the ordinance. Thank you.
Anybody else for public comment? All right, seeing none, we will be down to the closed session. We need to go into closed session, RCW 4.42.30.140, parentheses 4, contract negotiations with our HR director.
How much time?
And how much time do we need?
5 minutes,
5 minutes.
maybe 10 at the most.
Let's go 10 minutes. We can come out early.
early, but we can't take any action for resuming the meeting until the time has exceeded.
So we have 5 more minutes.
Yeah, so if we, I don't know what else we have going with the board.
Patiently. We should have went 5 minutes.
Commissioner Didier, are you going to want me on the phone for that executive session?
Sheriff, do you want her on the phone?
Nope.
That means you better be there, Jen.
Oh, my executive session's with me and you three.
You want me out? Oh,
And Karen.
Yeah, we're not out of closed session yet. Tell me when we were ready to come out of closed. What, do we got, a minute and a half?
3 minutes.
This is closed session. We gotta wait, because we gotta pass a resolution, and then so the toy train store that I was gonna take you out there to, passing away.
oh no,
Didn't see him
lost of scare?
yesterday. Yeah, he's
Oh, that's sad.
The,
Leroy Pranell.
is that the dad? That is quite impressive.
Train thing, yeah.
You'd never imagine that that's there.
It's all there.
So I asked him, train set for your grandson, which one? And he, first one, and he knew it, what it was, and so. Yeah, his kidneys are shutting down on him. He isn't taking any more dialysis.
Oh, Sean's not gonna be in my executive session.
Super Bowl commercial.
Time are we expecting for the exec session?
15, 20 minutes. Unless you're full of questions.
Okay, we have come out of closed session. We're back to regular session. I would entertain a motion.
Motion to approve Resolution 2023-053.
Second?
There's been a motion and a second for Resolution 2023-053. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. So that moves us down to an executive session. Mr. Davidson, would you please take us into that?
Yes, Chairman, the sheriff has requested an executive session pursuant to RCW 42.30.110, Section 1, subsection G, for a time to approximate, I think the sheriff said 15 minutes.
Any action anticipated afterwards?
No.
We've come out of executive session, we're back to regular session. Is there any other business for the good of the county? I'd like to ask the other commissioners if they've read this letter that has been put out. It's not in front of me right now, but it's a letter about the completion of the East High. It's right here, Board of Commissioners. Shirley is the one that handed it to me. I'd just like to say that there's a typo error here. It's not Dwayne Johnson, it's Dwayne Davidson at the top of the page. Have you guys seen this letter?
I have not.
I'd encourage you to look it up, read it. We need to probably make a decision on that and get that signed and back about the East High. Just in favor of it. It's from Patty Murray's office. To Patty Murray's office. So is there any other business for the good of the county? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.